There we go. So I earned my MFA in 2014 from the University of Cincinnati. And since then, I've worked in ceramic industry doing clay and glaze development. I've lived in China researching ceramics as part of a Fulbright grant, and also done many artist residencies. Currently, I'm teaching at ceramics at East Texas A&M University in Commerce, Texas. And I just put in a couple of slides here of our ceramic studio. That's from the hand building area, and then that's from the wheel throwing area looking the other way. I love our studio because we have a lot of natural light in the studio. And I'm working in the studio that Barbara Fry taught at, if you know who Barbara Fry is. She was there for 40 years. My own work balances experimentation with craft to create, and I create sculptures that challenge expectation of function and notions of stability. And the way I work was actually really shaped by this study abroad experience I had when I was in graduate school. I was in Berlin, Germany, and I didn't have access to clay or kiln, which at the time were my main medium. And so, but it forced me to do something outside of my comfort zone. When I got there, though, I didn't really know where to start. I think with my hands, and my work usually develops from working with the materials, so I just looked around to see what was available. I began stacking bricks, pieces of wood, and manufactured objects into these kind of precariously balanced sculptures. And some of these things I just found kind of in the yard of the studio. Some of them I went to hardware stores. And then these works kind of pull together a lot of industrial objects and to create sculptures that kind of are exploring play, humor, and then the tension of objects that may fall over. A little bit later that year, I went to China on another study abroad experience. And as I was walking around the sculpture factory, which is what's called, that's what's called the area where a lot of the artisans have their workshops set up, the sculpture factory, I noticed that the townspeople's resourcefulness of like stacking up available materials to make a coop for the chickens under the cooking stove, and then using this kind of stick to prop up the box on the scooter so it doesn't fall over. These kinds of things resonated with my own way of building sculptures, you know, from the materials at hand. And so when I was walking around the sculpture factory, I found this mold in this trash pile here, and it was like a mold that had been spent. I found the mold in the trash pile, and the mold was full of like dirt and leaves. And I took it back to the studio and poured casting slip into the mold to see what would happen. The castings, the dirt turned into a glaze when I fired it, and the cups, I know, pretty cool, huh? Sure. The cups, the kilns there fire so hot that it just melts the dirt. And then the cups became cleaner with each subsequent casting. So instead of casting, you know, replicas, they made originals in this kind of old mold. And I love the mold as an object too, so I displayed it all together because the process was an important part of the piece. And so this is work I made then back in my own studio in graduate school. And so my approach to making work, even in my own studio, is somewhat experimental. So I'm always thinking, what will happen if I do this? And then the results of those experiments become the answer to that question. And then, but then what do you do with all these kind of little objects? And how do you get people to notice them? So I started using some of the techniques I had been using in Germany of stacking up pieces and to create sculptures with these little experiments as part of those. And what I want to do is kind of set up this scenario where there's a little bit of a push and pull of wanting to get a closer look, but not wanting to knock anything over, right? And so I want to draw people in, so they want to explore what's happening with the kind of little weird things that I'm making, and then yeah, but then they don't want to get too close, so they're really aware of their body as they experience the sculptures. And then I use found objects, I use handmade objects, and I use industrial objects to highlight the nuances of each. I feel like if I just use a bunch of found objects, then it's hard to kind of create that sense of curiosity that I can if I use a variety of different kinds of objects. I'm also thinking about, what I like about clay is its permanence, its rock-like qualities, but then I like to put that in a position where it's a little bit at risk. So, yeah. And I'm thinking about kind of, and so that block there, it's aerated concrete, and so aerated concrete is like 30% lighter than regular concrete. It's like a green building material that I found in Germany, and I've been able to find here, but it's like not as common. And it's lovely because you can cut it and you can kind of change the shape of it, but then you can balance it. I mean, that's just paper there, that it's a coil of paper that it's balanced on. It's like nothing disguised and nothing is kind of glued together. And so this is like another sculpture that I made, and so I just kind of balanced these together, and then that little foam, like a little piece of styrofoam block, is kind of holding that in place. So, so these works end up being a little bit about time and impermanence too, right? Because they have this tension, like, oh, they might not be here tomorrow. But I feel like, I don't know, that's kind of how things are always in our lives, right? And so this is a collaboration with 4 other artists. And I find that collaborating with other artists is kind of similar, like requires a similar balance of control and reaction as being guided by experiments. So, and I like how working with other artists can introduce me to new materials and also push my work in new conceptual directions as well. So these were some artists I had met during graduate school. And this is like a year out of graduate school. And then with this exhibition, this is just with 2 other artists, we were thinking about presentation methods from window displays, store layouts, and boutiques. And in setting up these kind of, we're all making these kind of experimental objects, and we're setting them up in these kind of displays, thinking about merchandising. And then we're wondering, is the value of the objects more dependent on the presentation than on the value, on the objects themselves and the interest of them? So after graduate school, I started working at Rookwood Pottery, which is a really old pottery in Cincinnati that was started by a woman. And as part of that, I mean, that kind of continued my exploration of experimentation. I just felt like I totally loved going in and seeing what's going to happen if I mix these materials together, and then contributing kind of larger dialogue.
Okay.
Okay.
Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Funny chairs.
Welcome to art history.
Good. And so, yes, so I worked at Rookwood, and I helped them develop the translucent porcelain at Cone 6, and I really loved testing all of the stains with the porcelain slip that I made. And then after I worked at Rookwood, I got a year-long residency at the Lawrence Art Center in Lawrence, Kansas. And as part of that residency, I set up an installation in this building that was awaiting renovation in Lawrence. It had functioned as a meeting place and a kind of a dance hall, performance hall there. And so the inside was really distressed. And I've been used to using a lot of found objects, right, and gathering them and putting them in this clean white space. But this, for this exhibition, I had to change the way I was thinking about it, because if you put a bunch of rocks in there, it's not really going to look like anything. But I like working within the constraints of my environment, right? I like having these parameters and then seeing how that shifts, how I think about the work and how I make the work. So for this exhibition then I started using a lot more handmade objects. I pared down the colors so the differences in textures were more apparent. Yeah, I used a lot of sort of different kinds of white and gray. And I was also thinking about, I just had an exhibition with where we were setting up things, thinking about presentation and display methods, so I was thinking about that as part of this exhibition as well. And then while I was there at the Lawrence Art Center, Sergei Isakov, maybe you know his work, he came and did a workshop on how to build these kind of more voluminous forms just out of 2 slabs of clay. So that, then I started experimenting with that method. And so this was built out of 2 slabs of clay that I attached at the edges, you know, and left the inside open like a vase. And then I just pushed the forms out and then pushed in from the outside. And then I added those kind of protrusions are like little coil pots that I just added on, not coil pots, more like pinch pots that I added on. And then smoothed down the surface. And so these forms, I love the kind of intuitive way that I could work with the slabs and just like, oh, I'm just gonna cut out a shape and then match it and then see what happens. And also the kind of softness and movement that the forms have. And then I took vinyl stickers and covered the whole surface and then removed, like with a wet sponge, removed the clay that wasn't covered by the stickers, and then it revealed this kind of subtle texture. And then to set it up as a sculpture, then I have this kind of fabric piece here and a little bit of wood, and the pink is plaster. And so I think these kind of subtle shifts in materials moves your eye around the piece, and because of the twist of that piece, it has, and the twist of the fabric, it has kind of this nice movement. So at the end of my residency at Lawrence, then I had an exhibition of my work. And when I'm thinking about putting together an exhibition, then I'm thinking about kind of building a world for the viewer to explore and figure out. And I'd like to have enough repetition of sort of shapes or materials that they can find connections between the work, but enough variation that it's still kind of interesting and kind of draws people in. And I was working with, you can see the, you know, those kind of voluminous forms that I built using Sergei Isakov's method, and then also wood and cement and fabric as well. So some of the soft forms looked like they could be ceramic, and some of the ceramic forms looked like they could be fabric. So there was kind of a little bit of confusion about what the materials were, and this created this kind of sense of curiosity and this tension of everybody wanted to touch things to see, like, is it hard or is it soft? And so after I was in Lawrence, then I went back to China, to Jingdezhen, China, for a Fulbright. I got a Fulbright grant there, and so I lived there for 14 months. And Jingdezhen is famous for porcelain objects with blue and white painting, cobalt blue painting on them, and there's like a 1700-year history of porcelain production there. And they are, like right now, they mostly do porcelain tableware. And these are some of the artisans that work in the sculpture factory. And there is like a real, the infrastructure there is such that as an artist or a designer or a maker of some kind, you can go and kind of navigate these workshops and I realize your ideas really quickly. So they have someone who just makes flowers, and I don't know if you probably can't really see, but it just like makes totally beautiful flowers. Someone who makes molds, a master glazer, and so as a maker, you can just take your drawing of a vase, and you can have someone make the model for you, and then someone else can make the mold, and then you buy the casting slip, and you buy your glaze, and then the kilns are, sorry about that. The kilns are public and they fire every 24 to 48 hours.
Wow.
So I know, it's amazing. You load your work in and they fire it up really quickly. So maybe they started around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By 9 o'clock the next morning, you're like pulling your work out and it's hot, but fast, and it goes really high too, like higher than cone 10. So I can do all those things myself, right? Like I can make molds, I can make glazes, but it's exciting to be in a place where I realize those ideas really quickly, right? Like I can just take a drawing and then and you can do all the stuff that you really love, right? There's so much about ceramics that it just can be like feel kind of like work, or can just takes a while to realize yourself. But here it was just like in 3 weeks you can have a bunch of work made. So it's just kind of exciting to meet people and be there, and meet other designers. And one of my interests in returning to China was also to learn some of the traditional techniques there. So I took a class at Jingzhen Ceramics Institute in overglaze painting. I took 2 classes actually in overglaze painting. And so we spent 4 mornings a week for a month working on this plate. That's what I did. And we all copied the same image onto the same plate in the class. So it wasn't super creative, but it was really good for learning the skill. And then also I was still experimenting while I was there. So I started firing rocks in the clay. And some of the rocks melted, you can see where the holes were. Some of them shrank, and then some of them turned into chalk. And the chalky rocks then absorbed water from the atmosphere, and the pressure then built up and cracked the pot in like 2 days. So that's what it started out like, and that's how it ended. And also there was a lot of they do a lot of make a lot of vases and tableware production there, and I hadn't made a lot of vases in my own work or vessels at all, but being there, I just started making vessels. So I started building them up. I don't know if you can see, out of like little pieces of clay, little by little. I feel like all my work is like sort of slow and this kind of time consuming, but it felt like like I was embodying these kind of Song Dynasty potters and trying to learn from them piece by piece. And also thinking about how when you're making something that's kind of that's made by hand, how there's care embedded in it. And so thinking about that also with time and labor and care. And so these then at the end, this is kind of these still lifes I was kind of pulled together all of the ideas that I was working with in China. So the carefully crafted vessels, the experimentation, and so that's the vase that exploded. I just glued it back together with epoxy, and then and that became part of the piece. And also, so I'm thinking about the history of ceramics here with these works, and also the precariousness of working in clay. And I had a local florist then. I brought the vases in and she kind of set up the flowers. So that felt like a good collaboration. And after I came back from China, after I was back in the US, then I did this residency at the Kohler Company. So the Kohler Company, they make sinks and toilets, and they also have a fantastic artist residency. And you can be in the foundry or you can be in the pottery, and I chose to be in the foundry. And I think it was so much work. You're pushing around these carts that are like 700 pounds. I don't know. It was everything is so heavy. But it's been one of my favorite residencies. And I think part of it is because I didn't have much experience casting metal. And I think when you're a beginner at something, then you feel sort of open to take risks and try things and learn. And so it just felt like a lot of fun. And I also really enjoyed working with the workers in the factory. So they helped me. So this is a mold, and inside is a piece that is like 200 pounds of cast brass. So I wouldn't have been able to do that without help. And then Tom and Willie, they helped me put PVD on that. The PVD is the shiny silver stuff, and then they dipped it in tool dip. So PVD is like physical vapor deposition, like gold plating. It's what they coat their faucets with, so they don't get the water spots, I guess. And anyway, they just made it fun to be there. It was just like a really nice environment there with the workers. And while I was there then, they had these chunks of dense foam and a lathe. So I've never carved on a lathe before, so I carved this dense foam on a lathe, which I think is a lot easier probably than carving wood, because the dense foam is like carved so easily. And it was fun. It like kind of similar to working on a wheel, and that you can just shape these, you know, like it's on a circle, can make these kind of vessel forms. And then I made sand molds of the forms. And so sand and resin would come out of this chute. It was what they used to cast their big metal bathtubs, but I had my little molds. And so the sand would come out of the chute, and you'd like pack it all down, and then, you know, flip it over and do the other side. And then these molds weigh like 150 pounds. They're super heavy. And then you have to make an interior too, a core as part of the mold, otherwise the piece would be solid, and then it would be almost too heavy to lift. So that's why it looks that way. And then here they are pouring brass into the molds. And then these are some of the pieces that I made. So of course I was influenced by my time in China and the vessel and sort of the round forms, contemporary design, and then I was just kind of playing around too. I used dense foam to carve, but I used styrofoam for some of them too, and that had this sort of interesting texture of it being like transformed into metal, but you recognize it as styrofoam. And so I like kind of playing with that in my work, like, is it this or is it this, or how did it become this? And then I packed up these sculptures and I went to Willapa Bay Artist Residency, which is in Oysterville, Washington. And I was in Wisconsin in like February. And in April then, I was in Oysterville, Washington. In Wisconsin in February, it was so cold, and it was dark all the time, and I was working in the factory, and it got up to like 27 degrees, and I was like, oh, spring is here. And like it was just that difference in temperature. And then I went to this like beautiful, lush landscape, and so I just set up these sculptures. I had these sculptures, I don't know, it was like really different from the work that I usually make. They were metal. So I had fun like setting them up in the landscape and documenting them, like little still lifes. I think they kind of lose their sense of scale, right? And so they're different segments. So the tallest one is maybe like 16 inches tall, but I feel like they kind of look like they could be larger or smaller. And then sometimes they feel like still life, sometimes landscape, and sometimes even more figurative. So this was driving home. I went through Utah and saw a spiral jetty there, and took photos of it. I just took photos of those little sculptures everywhere. And then later that year, I went to Australian National University, and I was a visiting artist there. And I like looking at the front of the buildings, at the sculptures and monuments, and then at the back of the buildings, and the dumpsters and trash piles. And in the back, like near my studio then, was a kiln yard, right? With all of this ceramic debris, broken kiln shelves, old bricks. And so I was like combing through them, and but they all kind of looked too much like familiar. We're so familiar with ceramic trash. And so I started glazing them, and then that just kind of took it a little bit outside, right? Like kind of disguises them, right? It doesn't really look like a broken kiln shelf there, that blue piece, because it's covered in this like foamy glaze. So that was kind of an exciting discovery, was that I could just, these are ceramic things, I can just glaze them. And then I was making these kind of interesting abstract, the one on the second from the left is paper clay. Maybe that was maybe my first experience with paper clay, just like kind of seeing how it all fit together. And yes, and then I experimented with all their kilns there, and I ended up overfiring these pieces. And the faculty member there said they looked well cooked. And as the glaze is like sliding off of them. Anyway, but this is like a lava glaze on here, and I don't know what it went to, come 7 or 8, but it all turned like so silvery and lovely. So sometimes mistakes can work out. Then back in my own studio, I was living in Phoenix at this point, and I started using these bricks, like soft bricks from the kiln, and just glazing them to make pedestals, because I love them as this kind of clean white plinth that I can then set this found object on, and then you can see kind of these lovely shifts in color. And then I can they're modular, so I can stack them up and make different shapes and then take them apart. And kiln bricks are light, so they're like not too heavy to shift, not too hard on your body to move around. I made this exhibition in 2020. So I started working on this work just as everything was shutting down for the pandemic, and I wasn't sure what materials, I don't know if you remember that, we weren't sure what materials we'd have access to, what spaces we'd have access to, were we even going to be able to get clay, and so I was like, all right, what do I have, what can I repair, what sculptures can I disassemble and put back together for this exhibition? Okay, I've got all these bricks, how can I stack them up? So I repaired, this is aerated concrete that I had gotten, and I lived all over, and so I just took it with me, and then you move, and it's so light and fragile, it breaks, and so I'm like, well, I'm just gonna glue it back together, now's the time to use it. And then I was living in Phoenix, and my whole front yard was rocks, so I started just like going out and seeing what cool rocks I could find in my front yard, and using these rocks and putting them in the clay. And then that gray piece is like, I built the form around the rocks and then took the rocks out, so it was like the absence of the rocks. And then these are kiln bricks here that I fired. And so with this work, I was kind of thinking about monuments and maybe how we'd outgrown some of our monuments. There was a lot of tension happening in the world at this time, especially in the US. Maybe how we've outgrown some of our monuments, and how would it look to have monuments that we could change and that could change with us, right? So all these pieces, well, except the rocks. I mean, those rocks I just like glued together sort of one by one with epoxy. But the other pieces you can just like take them together and rebuild them as something different. And then here's another view of that exhibition. And so then a year later, I had an exhibition in the same space. So this is a gallery called I Lounge, and I was part of an artist collective. And there were 11 of us, and we ran the gallery, and we each got one solo show a year. And so then we had a group show together as the 12th show of the year. And I created this work thinking about rocks and the layers of sedimentation, erosion from wind and water, and also the fusion of minerals with the heat, all the processes kind of that form rocks. And in my work then I'm always failing, like with ceramics. I feel like things, you never know how they're gonna turn out in the kiln. So with this piece, this blue one here, I glazed it, and then I'm like, oh, it looks ugly, and then I glaze it again, and I glaze it again, and so I feel like failure is an important part of that process. There's something about the dialogue with the work that sometimes it needs to be, I just know that it's going to be much more interesting if I just keep working at it, right? Keep firing it and trying things. And then with this piece, the two top pieces were separate, and then I put them together in the kiln. I had an old kiln. It was, I don't know, maybe 40 years old or something, and I loved it because it was just like all the switches were like light switches, and but I felt like I could blow up anything in that, and it wasn't precious. I have a kiln now with a computer on it, and I feel a little bit like, oh, I should be a little careful with it. But with that, I can just like do whatever. So I just stacked the pieces together, hoping that they wouldn't slide off of one another, and that they would fire together in the kiln. And so all this glaze oozed out and stuck it together. And then the black bubbly glaze, I wasn't expecting that. I do a lot of testing, but then sometimes I just test stuff right on the piece and hope that it works out. So that's what happened with that. And then I like to balance that chaos, from the experimentation with lots of clean plinths to give the viewer a place for their eyes to rest. And the pedestals are part of the piece. So I make all the pedestals too. And then this was an exhibition I had in Phoenix in 2023, and as part of this, I wanted to show you these works that are made of porcelain paper clay. So that's what I'm going to be demonstrating today, is how to use porcelain paper clay. And so I built this form out of porcelain paper clay, but then I didn't know, it was just like, oh, it's just this grid, it's kind of boring. So, and then this piece here, it was just like this white kind of coil piece. And so on a separate piece, then I experimented with putting watercolor and ink and then graphite, and I ended up really loving this powdered graphite. It has this sort of luminous quality, and so that's what I ended up using on both of these pieces. I just masked it off with like little pieces of tape and then sealed it with a resin. And then this is an exhibition from the Gold Mark that maybe many of you have seen. And I'm thinking about physical space and psychological space and these different forces that we encounter, like heavy and weighty, earthy and industrial, and poetic and unexpected. And so this work, I'm interested in art history and contemporary art and design, and so that influences the forms the work takes. And also I'm interested in this, how like this repetition of a single action, like rolling out a coil, can build into something more complex, like the way that any action you do over time is transformative. I'm also interested in contrasts, like light and heavy, hard and soft, humorous and serious. And so I think that furry coil piece has some humor to it, and that's important to me. Like, I want to give viewers something maybe a little bit unexpected in the gallery. But then the rocks, these are porcelain, and they maybe have a little more seriousness to them, a little bit weightier. And then I'm also thinking about, when I'm setting up an exhibition, I'm thinking about, I want the viewer to have an experience when they approach the gallery of it being it feeling calm and also curious, and I want that to kind of draw them in. But then as they approach the pieces that are a little bit precarious, I want them to feel that shift of from being calm to being kind of aware of their body in this space and a little bit nervous as these things might fall off. So when I'm setting up an exhibition, that I'm thinking about, what will the viewer's experience be as this, and how can I lure them through the exhibition? I feel like I make it especially for the viewers. And then this last summer, I spent a month at Rondo residency in Mexico City. So this is kind of an overview of the studio in general and the other residents, and this is my studio that I worked in. And they don't have clay facilities there, so I use their industrial sewing machine. And in preparation for that, I did some planning, and I knew that I wanted to, there are a lot of pyramids and cathedrals in Mexico City, so I knew I wanted to kind of research and explore the sacred spaces there. I'm interested in that experience of awe that can be, that you feel with sacred architecture, and so I just wanted to see how that could influence my work. And so I did a lot of reading about the history of Mexico before I went, and I was glad to have that as that background as I researched the cultural sites. So on my first day in Mexico City, I was fortunate to discover this cathedral, and I feel like I loved the light. It was so light and bright, maybe one of the lightest and brightest and most modern looking cathedrals I had seen while I was there. And so, and I really was interested in this the architectural quality of this roof, and I thought, excuse me, the ceiling, and so I thought, well, maybe I can make something based on that. So I experimented with some different fabrics, and eventually at a local fabric store, I found something that was like stiff enough, and then I could stiffen more by ironing it with starch, that it would hold its own shape in this as a modular. So I'm working it with a module as well here. And so I made this piece, which is like very direct reference to that, that ceiling, like building architecture from fabric. And then I did eventually suspend it so it was like kind of arched in the gallery space. But then after I made this, I had this breakthrough, like, oh, I can use this module piece to create a sculpture, right? It doesn't have to be like a flat piece. And so I made first the suspended piece. I made that first. It was like quite simple. And then I thought, oh, I'll make a form. I'll make like a structural form out of this fabric. And so like sewing. I was like a one-person factory there, just like sewing. And all the, just like the same thing over and over. And so then I took the modular pieces and I sewed this form, and and I set it up, and it just like sinks in on itself, like classically. And I was like, well, that didn't quite work out the way I expected. But then it was like had this kind of bubbly, vulnerable quality to it, and like this big sort of like just sagging there, like you feel at the end of the day. So. At the end of the open studio, they had this, at the end of the residency, they had this open studio event planned, right? And so I find those deadlines kind of motivating. So my plan was, this is the studio space that I've been working in, was to clear that out and then set up these pieces in the studio space to create this installation that viewers would navigate with their bodies physically. And so I had these two pieces and then kind of that long ceiling piece here, and it felt like I was getting some kind of living room design vibes from these, and I didn't want to go in that direction, right? So I'm like, I need another piece that to insert into the space that kind of takes it definitely into the realm of sculpture. So then I made this long piece, which is my favorite one, and I love the negative space that's happening between the wall and the floor, and also the translucent quality, but that kind of just sort of injected into that space, and then the other pieces are over here. So viewers, as they walk in here, had to navigate that, and so it felt like it was sculpture after that. And then this is the last project I'm going to talk about. This is an exhibition I had last month with two of my friends who I teach with at East Texas A&M University. So my sculptures are on the floor here, and then Lee Merrill's photographs are on the left. I have a small sculpture in the middle, and then these are Josephine Durkin's wall sculptures here that are made of paper. And I made these sculptures definitely with their work in mind, especially Lee Merrill's photographs, which have these kind of pastel colors and the pink and the green. And it felt like pretty risky to do that, to make my sculptures these kind of candy colors. But I think that's one of the great things about collaborating too, is because it also felt safe to do that. Like, or like accessible. Like it's about this collaboration, right? And I want that my work to be in conversation with theirs. So I'm just going to do it, right? I'm going to take this risk. And I really love the way that my sculptures looked in the space with the photographs and the color of them, and I feel like their work created like more, I don't usually have images on the wall of my work, but I love the way it created this kind of context for my sculptures to live in. And so now I have a solo show coming up next year, and I'm making sort of larger wall drawings, not wall drawings, but larger drawings, to function kind of in a similar way. And I don't think I would have gotten there if I hadn't had that collaboration with them. So, yeah. So just to close then, I would like to encourage you to collaborate with other artists, take risks in your own work, and say yes to every opportunity. And I do have a list of resources if you're interested in artist residencies. This list isn't exhaustive, but it does kind of give you a place to start if you're interested.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I have to say, I was in the show in San Angelo, and your piece was there, which you showed a little bit of.
Yeah.
I absolutely fell in love with that, took pictures of it, brought it home, showed it to my husband, saying, you gotta have this piece, it's a beautiful piece.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Lovely.
Thank you. That graphite on there is so
Just
nice.
amazing, yeah.
And it's powdered graphite. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, you're just really fascinating, and gosh, you are willing to throw yourself into anything. That's really wonderful. How do you see your concern with precariousness fitting into an art historical context? I mean, is it a contemporary concern? You know, I'm just fascinated by the concern with precariousness and vulnerability and, you know, unsettling the viewer going through the gallery and so I mean, I'm very fascinated by that idea, and you seem to have had something like that from the beginning, you know, with your balancing, you know, your sculptures that balance and everything and could fall and break at any moment. So it's just curious. Is it a contemporary issue, do you think, and are you picking up on that sense of modern life, or our ignorance of our attempt to avoid it?
Oh, wow, I feel like that's a really great question and very deep. There are definitely other artists who are working with this idea of precariousness. And I also think, I'm not Buddhist, but I do read some Buddhist philosophies, and so there's a nun, Pema Chodron, who writes a lot about kind of groundlessness, this experience of we're always searching for this kind of stable ground, and it just doesn't exist, and that's kind of the essence of our misery, is that we're this search for the stable ground. So I feel like there are some contemporary thinkers.
That's good, thank you.
Yes.
Can you talk about your journey of going to all of these wonderful residencies? Like, how, I don't know that I've heard an artist talk where somebody talked about going to so many different places, actually in what feels like to me kind of a compressed amount of time. So it's really wonderful. How did that start for you, and how did you come across, you know, how did this kind of unfold for you?
Well, I think I should preface it by saying that it started in graduate school, and I went to graduate school later. So I was like in my 30s when I went to graduate school, and I feel like that makes a difference because I had, you know, financially I was in a different place than I was in my 20s. I had a partner, and so I feel like then there's a little more stability there. And also I hadn't had the opportunity to travel much, so I knew when I was in graduate school that after I left, I wanted to use that time to do artist residencies and travel and have those experiences. So, but I was fortunate to have professors who were young, and they took us to, you know, China and to Berlin. The professor who took me to Berlin had also done a Fulbright, so he encouraged us to apply for the Fulbright. He said they want artists. I mean, I wouldn't have known that if someone hadn't have told me. And so, and I was in a situation then where you can get a lot of support from your university or your school to apply to the Fulbright. They have people kind of to help you. And when I was at the Lawrence Art Center is when I was applying, like writing my application, and they had a grant writer there who like worked with me one-on-one and helped me with my application. And so I feel like I was in a position where I had a lot of support. And then once you get started with that, then you just learn. You know, you look at you just like look for those experiences, and yeah, and then you kind of builds on itself. Yeah. And now that I'm teaching, then I just do residencies in the summer. So, but I mean, I wasn't teaching in 2018, that year that I did 3 residencies or something like that. Yeah. And the residency in Australia I got because I did an artist talk when I was in China, and the faculty member from Australia was there and saw me doing my artist talk, and then she invited me. So that's why, you know, like taking some risks and doing things, you know, then they lead to other opportunities. Yeah.
So in your work, that mysterious place, your pedestal was like a piece of wood with a brick, and like I'm sure you were taking a risk to look more interesting. Like that brick was kind of tilted, like it was not straight. So like for me, I was nervous it might fall off, but I guess that was your intention.
Right.
Right. But so those pieces of wood and those bricks are connected, or just you just put? That was I was not sure. Like
Yeah.
it was made.
There's a little bracket it's made of ceramic actually that is screwed into the wall and screwed into the wood on the wall side. And then on this side, it's just the bricks, but I did decide to stick them together with a little bit of museum putty.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so the bricks are like, so they're pretty secure.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
somebody just kicked that block. But I thought that was your intention. I'm not sure.
Well, I have recently started using museum putty, but before that, in some of the earlier exhibitions that I had, I just had like blocks, the bricks stacked end to end, and then something here. And if someone kicks it, you know, sometimes people bring dogs through the gallery, and I'm a little bit nervous, right? Like if someone kicks it, then I mean everything's gonna fall.
Oh.
So there is that. I mean, there's the risk.
Yeah.
But you know, just make something else.
Yeah, but it was very interesting because like if you put too much support, it loses your like beauty of your art. But like it gets too clouded. But if you don't have enough support, you're gonna lose your work. So I thought that it was very interesting way to show your work.
Yeah, thank you. I like this idea of it being an experience with, you know, the body. And if I feel nervous about everything standing up, then I feel like, well, then it's probably a good place to be, right? Yeah. Yes.
How do we find you online? Do you have a web page?
I have a website, it's just my name. Oh, here, I'm sorry.
I have one more question. Just kind of jumping off of the conversation that we're having, it's like a lot of really good questions. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about maybe the way you think about looking. Like I'm thinking about John Berger and maybe like Richard Tuttle a little bit, and kind of historical sculpture, like people very Kuzi who are like working with the built environment, the kind of poetics of materials and objects. And I'm curious, are you like always looking for those opportunities? Do they kind of come out at you at certain points? Like what is your kind of process of making when you're not physically working with materials?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that always, as artists, you know, we're developing our noticing skills and our observation skills. And I feel like more and more, when I was a young artist, I was like, how do you be an artist, right? Like what things do you need to do to be an artist, and how does it happen? But then now I feel like, oh, learning to look and notice things, I think is one of the most important things about being an artist. And And I think that happens, you know, as we're out in our environment. I think construction sites are really, and anywhere that you don't expect to see art, right? Construction sites are a great place to notice, you know, the way things are stacked up. And I've been noticing like lots of piles of things on this as I'm driving through Dallas. You know, they're doing construction everywhere on the roads, and there are lots of piles of things around, and how similar those are to landscape. And so I am always noticing, and then as I'm making, then I'm noticing what my materials are doing, and noticing like, oh, what's working, what's interesting, what is it that I should continue? And if I work in multiples a lot, like just like making one mark or one coil and then repeating it and repeating it. And so if I've got 5, like, oh, that's not very interesting. If I've got 15, oh, now maybe things are getting more interesting, and then more and more. So I think a lot, I'm like experimenting, trying things, and then looking, and lots of looking, yeah, and just noticing, how could that be a sculpture?
You seem to be drawn to rubble. You seem to be drawn to rubble.
I am drawn, yeah, I'm drawn. Yes, well, right, but those like, there are little moments, but somehow there's like a little bit of beauty there in that, and how can I get someone to see what's happening here? That's really what I'm thinking about.
Okay, is there any other questions? Thank you so much. That's really